Violent extremism and terrorism represent an increasingly diffuse, dynamic, and destabilizing threat. In Uganda, the country's most potent terror threat comes from the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, also known as the Islamic State Central Africa Province, ISCAP. The Allied Democratic Forces, born from a coalition of rebel forces including the Uganda Muslim Liberation Army and the National Army for the Liberation of Uganda, NALU, has perpetrated numerous deadly assaults. Their objectives range from challenging President Yoweri Museveni's administration to establishing Sharia law. Pledging allegiance to the Islamic State, ADF's violence has spanned over 28 years, extending across Uganda and the Democratic Republic DRC. Their stronghold in eastern DRC provides strategic advantages, enabling rural insurgency, base establishment, fighter recruitment, and backing from anti-government Ugandan ethnic groups.
The
government of Uganda classifies the ADF as a terrorist organization and accuses it of most recently sending militias that stormed Lubiriha Secondary School in Mpondwe, Kasese, near the Democratic Republic of the Congo DRC border, killing at least 37 students and a guard and 3 civilians. 20 girls were murdered with machetes and 17 boys were burnt to death when petrol bombs were thrown into their dormitory. 6 more students were kidnapped and used to carry food back to the assailants' base. These were also slaughtered afterwards. The group's faction allied to Islamic State, ISIS, is also held responsible for the Kampala twin bombings in November 2021. ISIS claimed responsibility for the twin bombings that claimed 7 lives and injured 37. This documentary highlights some of the tricks the group uses to recruit people into their ranks, as well as the risks of engaging in violent extremist activities. In Uganda, ADF capitalizes on grievances and injustice, particularly against Muslims, to fuel extremist recruitment. Indoctrination transpires in certain mosques guided by radicalized leaders targeting mostly males aged 37 to 35. Prospective recruits are swayed by promises of paradise for martyrdom and fighting injustices against Muslims. In accounts shared by returnees and former ADF members who requested to conceal their identities, the path from radicalization to violent extremism and ultimately to terrorism is a gradual process.
I cherished my relationship with God and always sought a deeper understanding of Him, particularly within the context of my Muslim faith. However, one of the challenges I faced was the absolute acceptance of certain beliefs when seeking to connect with God. The clerics encouraged us to love God ardently and disregard those who did not share our Muslim beliefs.
They told us that there were individuals who adopted Muslim names but had ulterior motives, seeking to undermine and tarnish the reputation of Islam.
These imposters would commit heinous acts to provoke hostility towards our faith. Consequently, when faced with the possibility of infiltration by enemies, the instinct of self-defense was awakened. This marked the beginning of our struggle to protect our faith.
It is just that some returns don't always want to say the truth about their involvement with the ADF. While they claim to have joined the group unknowingly, most adults, except children, we were well aware of the primary desire for revenge against injustices we faced as Muslims. We were informed that President Museveni, who was then a defense minister in the new military formation, ordered the killing of our Muslim brothers during the Tanzania-Uganda war that toppled President Amin. The sheikhs always reminded us of this historical injustice during our prayers. There was a senior sheikh from Makerere University preaching about atrocities committed against Muslims. He claimed to have researched extensively about those killings. He teamed up with other sheikhs, and indeed we got charged. We vowed to fight this government. I was in my 20s then.
After becoming radicalized, individuals would be taken in the night. They instructed us that it was time to take action. While they didn't disclose the specific agenda, they did educate us on upholding our religious values.
I lived in Masaka, but we eventually traveled to Kampala, where we arranged for tickets and spent the night. Early the next morning, we boarded buses and embarked on our journey. We crossed the border via Kasese, Masindi, and we entered what was then known as Zaire.
We walked until evening and arrived at a place I couldn't recognize, but we met other Muslim colleagues there.
The male escort informed me that I didn't need to bring clothes. After dressing, we boarded a bus that took us to our location. We reached around sunset, roughly 8-9 p.m. I saw a sign indicating Kihihi in western Uganda. He directed me to sit and wait for another person to pick me up. As instructed, a man arrived, asked me to follow him, and I complied, even though I had no idea of our destination.
I was informed late in the evening that we were to leave, and I couldn't sleep at home that night. Early the next morning, we boarded a bus. It happened to be a market day. We were told to look for a person who would tap us on the shoulder and follow them promptly. We were cautioned not to wear hijabs or any head coverings that could identify us as Muslims. After a while, a man tapped me, and I followed him into a small house near the market. Inside were various individuals, including a sheikh from a mosque I knew. Guns were laid out like a mat, and people were seated around them. Carrying our bags on our backs, we began our journey in the evening. We walked a short distance, entering the bush. We spent the entire night crossing several hills before reaching the rebel camp by morning. The location resembled a mountain, and the first thing I noticed was a military-style training session featuring sheikhs I had seen in my local mosque.
Many individuals also join extremist groups due to limited education and poverty, while others follow spouses into extremist ranks. Children born in these conditions often become automatic recruits for jihadist causes. Individuals are instructed to take buses as the first step in joining rebel groups in the dense forests of the Democratic Republic of Congo. They meet contacts at designated border points who help them with the process.
Initially, they informed us that we had received sponsors who would support orphans. They took us away from our parents and brought us to Kampala. Alongside us, some of our family members who were accomplices were also taken. Our conviction grew stronger as we were comforted by the presence of relatives. From there, we were transported without understanding that we were being led into fighting.
The recruiters approached me while I was still in school, enticing me with the prospect of lucrative jobs and prominent positions once the conflict was over. This promise of a better future was a significant factor that drew me to the idea.
During a period of severe financial difficulties, a Muslim colleague approached me. He introduced the idea of joining the ADF. He convinced me that our lives would significantly improve upon return.
Nali mu myaka 18 dali 25 yakuba ate ali muno kidi nti be atidde tutambuleko.
At the age of 18, my husband instructed me to leave our children behind and accompany him to an undisclosed location. I was confused and inquired about our destination and whether we could bring our kids along. Sadly, he couldn't provide any answers. The time came and we boarded a vehicle with our Muslim colleagues. We embarked on a long journey, eventually arriving at a place that left a positive impression on me. I assumed this was where we were meant to reside. However, my apprehension grew as we ventured into the wilderness. My husband reminded me to uphold the Muslim values and exercise patience with whatever challenges Allah sent our way. Advice I accepted. We spent weeks and months in the setting, during which injured colleagues began to arrive. They could hardly explain the circumstances, leaving me puzzled. My husband instructed me to prepare a mixture of painkillers and other medications to aid the injured, saying they had encountered difficulties. This was happening as we lived in the hills at the time.
Contrary to promises made during the radicalization and recruitment stages, life in the bush is harsh and is characterized by numerous risks.
There was the abduction of innocent school-going children. These children were kidnapped and brought to the wilderness where they were neither educated nor counseled. Witnessing this deeply troubled me and left a significant impact. I was so moved that I could not continue with the ADF group's mission to fight against the government. They even kidnapped women, including some who were pregnant and exhausted. When it was time for childbirth, there was no medical assistance and the commanders were indifferent. They would order the killing of these women if they made noise during labor, deeming it a security risk. There came a point when my fellow colleagues were being killed as well. I questioned the nature of this conflict, wondering if it truly aligned with Islamic principles. I pondered whether God truly allowed taking someone's life due to differing beliefs. The concept of killing seemed inappropriate with Allah. In fact, I was one of the individuals who protested within the group, expressing my disagreement with their motives. I went as far as telling them that if this was their purpose, they could kill me if they wished. My dissent led to my arrest for 3 months. Ultimately, 2 other colleagues came to my aid, and we managed to escape and surrender to the government.
They killed those who sustained injuries. They slaughtered them like goats because they could hardly walk. Time came and the commanders also wanted to eliminate me, something that caused a scuffle as colleagues protested the action. This is how I survived because I was supposed to be killed.
Suspicions of spying filled the rebel camp, leaving everyone uncertain of how information reached the commanders. People would be detained out of nowhere, hastily tried in a kangaroo court. Any form of defense was futile, as whatever the spy reported was accepted as truth. They presented two options for punishment: public humiliation by beating or death, refusal of the former meant the latter. The method of execution was not straightforward. Victims were taken on missions and subjected to various means of murder.
We came to Kampala on a mission to assassinate an ex-ADF rebel, but I was arrested before we carried out the act. He arrived at the mosque, where we had planned to confront him, in a 14-seater taxi, attempting to conceal his identity. Despite this setback, our orders were clear. We were instructed to shoot everyone present to ensure the mission's success.
I regret the heinous acts I committed in one of the local villages where I launched an attack. I kicked a child, pushed him under the bed, yet they had cried for mercy because they were Muslims. I regret it. Secondly, I regret having joined a rebel group because of the incitement and the desire to destabilize this country. The truth is, we still had a chance to dialogue.
Returnees from these extremist groups, while initially joining for ideological reasons, often regret their involvement due to the contradiction with their religious beliefs. Seeking reintegration, some have benefited from the Amnesty Act of 2000, which offers forgiveness for renouncing terrorist activities. Nonetheless, returnees grapple with shattered families, disrupted livelihoods, and stigma, reminding them of their dark past.
And neither do I have a garden to harvest food. Not everyone who comes claiming to help you has good motives. Some people want to recruit your children into rebel groups.
Joining the war was not necessary. It was out of ignorance, a decision that has left me in abject poverty. Upon returning to the community, I found it hard to integrate. My ability to provide for my family and my children has been severely compromised. The community's fear of me became evident, making it even more challenging to rebuild my life. My children, despite their initial shock, were glad to see me again. One of them sadly passed away shortly after my return due to a heart disease.
Not a single day goes by without praying to Allah, pleading for the return of my children whom I had to leave behind in the bush when government soldiers attacked us. One of them was only 6 years old, and the other was 8. I am left with no option but to plead with Allah for their safe return.
To all Ugandans considering involvement in terrorism, I implore you to consider your choice. Many individuals who joined rebel groups have experienced devastating consequences, leading to fractured families and children often resorting to criminal activities. This is because parents left their children as young as 3 years when they joined these rebel groups, depriving them of proper care and guidance.
Researchers from Makerere University have found that unemployment is a significant factor in driving youth towards violent extremism. Their book, Countering Violent Extremism in Uganda, History, Philosophies and Strategies, emphasizes the need for collaboration between state and non-state entities to combat extremist actions. While reactive military approaches remain important, the researchers stress the significance of early-stage prevention by addressing the underlying factors that attract individuals to extremism.